In a couple of videos I made some time back, I was talking about the borders of science and the boundaries of science. And what I was talking about that specifically was about how, I guess, how the status of the language seems to change at the points where scientific discourse, empiricism, starts to break down and become something else. And it was really part of a general kind of project I'm thinking about, which is to do with poetics. And how language conceptualization is rendered using strategies which might be called poetic, which isn't to undermine the validity of the empirical project. It's just, I think this is how discourse works, and I think this is how parts of psychology work, or cognition work, if you like. Scientific discourse, by its nature, is not felt to be poetic. But that, I think, is based on an understanding of poetics which makes a distinction between plain speaking and speech which is heavily laden with overt metaphors. What I was saying in that, drawing on other bits of research, is that scientific discourse is itself constructed through metaphors, which, as I say, doesn't question its validity. It just demonstrates how it works, really, conceptually and linguistically. And the examples I gave from that, for example, were things like the use of the passive voice, suppression of first person, lots of metaphors to do with transparency, as if empirical facts were kind of objects in a well lit, clearly differentiated space, those kind of metaphors. But what I was saying previously, and what I want to try to get onto here, is that there are times at the boundaries of science. There are times at the boundaries of scientific endeavour when poetry becomes overt, it asserts itself. And the examples I gave last time were the temporal boundaries of the beginnings of science, when it was quite clear that metaphorical and poetic flourishes were being used to try to describe empirical physical experiences, and modern cutting-edge science, in which terms like dark energy, dark matter, quantum inseparability, those kind of terms are used quite overtly again as poetic flourishes. They're intended to be placeholders before the more thoroughgoing scientific explanations can take their place. But as I say, at the boundary, that poetry becomes obvious. You're not supposed to take superstrings literally as string. It would be a mistake to try to identify what particular textile superstrings are made of, for example. It's poetry. Anyhow, the boundary I've been thinking about today, and the other boundary, if you like, is to do with pseudoscience, which really irritates me, actually. I've got a real thing about pseudoscience. Not because I'm a hardline literalist, but because I think it's misguided and clumsy and chauvinistic for reasons I hope I'll try and get on to. But I can give an example of that. I was at a conference yesterday, and there was a guy speaking. I missed his keynote address, unfortunately, but I did a bit of research around him. I read his abstract for his paper. And he was talking about subtle matter fields within the context of acting really in theatrical endeavours, and how something called subtle matter fields, which are like energy fields that come off all material and which have something to do with consciousness, underpin certain aspects of the theatrical experience. And he was saying it completely literally. In fact, he came to me at the end of my presentation, because I was talking about a rock at one point in the thing that I was talking about, and was talking to me about the subtle matter fields that minerals give off. I was too polite to say at the time, and perhaps that's my fault, but I just thought, this is bullshit. This is just bullshit. And it's not just bullshit, it's odd bullshit. It's bad poetry bullshit, in my opinion. Of course there are going to be boundaries of science, of course, and that would be fine, and in a sense it's okay to express those poetically, but the extent that one should invest in the poetry and treat it as real is really well, that is just wrong, really. It's just wrong to do that, I think. I think it's fine that actors, and he was talking about actors and theatre makers, I think it's fine that actors think about energy fields and think about presence, actually presence as some kind of force field. I think it's absolutely fine. People, that's in a lot of acting manuals talk about it in those kind of terms. It doesn't make it real, and it's not necessary for it to be real, actually. It's just a kind of strategy that you might use to treat it as real and to try to do all this weird stuff with it and to try to relate it to something which is just, subtle energy fields or subtle matter fields. There's absolutely no supporting evidence for those. It just seems to me misguided. I think the idea of subtle matter fields comes originally from Newton, who talked about those in relation to the ether, which was very popular at the time. But even he was in two minds about it. I think he was in the Principia, I think, but I think he kept trying to decide whether to include it or not, because it was anomalous in some of his other bits of his thinking. And that was 250, 300 years ago, so I thought we'd have gone past that by now, really. The reason why I say it's chauvinistic, actually, I think I should just say that, is because for me it seems to be a misapplication of the kind of phenomenological strategies we need as individual embodied human beings with very limited individual access to the wider world. Those kind of strategies in which we do imagine force fields, or we do imagine all kinds of fake substances, metaphorical substances, just to get us through the day. That kind of knowledge, there's a confusion of that with empirical knowledge, which is shared across the viewpoints of anybody who cares to adopt that position, and that's different again to whatever the universe is really made of. And I'm assuming we don't have access to large parts of what's actually out there, so to speak. So the idea that we can collapse that whole complex nature of the universe, or even the fairly complex nature of interpersonal experience, empirical experience, collapse that into the experiences of an individual human being, basically by saying, I have consciousness, this is what it feels like to me, therefore the whole world feels like that. It's centrist and chauvinistic in a way, which I think is really unhelpful. And it results in just bad poetry. I think it just results in bad poetry. I think if this guy who'd been talking yesterday had made a poem about these ideas, subtle matter fields, I think that would have been fantastic. But he didn't. He chose to make it as a piece of quasi-pseudo-scientific writing. To me, it's a bit like if Rabindranath Tagore, whose poems I really like, if he'd said to himself, well, this stuff's real, I'll actually write about the ocean of forms, and I'll draw a map of it, and I'll give some scientific data about how deep that ocean is, and I'll present it in a conference, and I'll talk about it as if it's real. It would be a mistake. It misses the point. It's about the details of phenomenological experience that we may have things in common with and may not. It's not about the real structure of the real world, whatever that means.